So again, welcome to our Nature Connections webinar series. This is from the Campbell Valley Nature House. And thank you for joining us today. As I've said a couple of times, I'm Jeff Roten and I'm with Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. This webinar series is graciously hosted by Pacific Parklands Foundation. And right now I would like to introduce their Executive Director, Janet Antonio, to say a few words. So I'm going to spotlight you. Janet, you're on now.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I was thinking it was going to be a sunny Saturday, but obviously out here it's not, but hopefully it'll change for Sunday. Before we start the seminar, we'd like to start by acknowledging that the Nature House is on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish First Nation. And I wish to extend our appreciation for the opportunity to hold this webinar on their shared traditional territories. Also, just briefly about the foundation, the Pacific Parklands Foundation was founded 20 years ago to support Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. So we raise funds and we give grants to protect our parks and connect people to nature. So thank you, Jeff, Linda, and Lisa for being here today, and the Campbell Valley Nature Park for partnering with us to present these webinars. It's a tremendous opportunity for us, and it is a pleasure to be with you today. So thank you. Over to you, Jeff.
Okay, there we go. Back to me. Okay, just to let people know, if you see me looking to a side screen, I just have another computer going here. Okay, so for those of you who haven't been there, the Nature House is in Campbell Valley Regional Park, and that's in South Langley in Metro Vancouver. And the Nature House is currently housed in the beautiful heritage red barn that you see in the photo there, and it has interactive displays and exhibits for the whole family. So today I'm really excited to welcome Lisa Dreves and Garima Wilson from Langley Environmental Partners Society, otherwise known as LEPS.
Thank you, Jeff. Lovely to be here. As Jeff said, my name is Lisa. I'm the Stewardship Coordinator at Langley Environmental Partners Society, and I'm here with my coworker, Garima, our Education Coordinator at LEPS. Just briefly, an outline of the presentation today. We'll be going over LEPS and Langley, what biodiversity is, different habitats, primarily ones found in Campbell Valley Park, biodiversity that's at risk, and then what you can do about getting biodiversity in your own backyard. So LEPS is a nonprofit, non-government organization. Our mission is to protect and restore the natural environment through education, cooperation, and action. Education is certainly our largest program at LEPS. LEPS has been working for the last 25 years in both the city and the township of Langley. The information given out today is from the township of Langley, the larger municipality. The municipality of the city of Langley is a tiny little chunk in there, but they are their own separate identity. The township of Langley is mostly farmland. 74% of the township of Langley is still in the agricultural land reserve. So it's mostly protected from a lot of the urban development you see in a lot of the other lower mainland municipalities, so, which is great. We also have about 4% of the township of Langley is in protected as park space, mostly because of Metro Vancouver. There's actually 4 of the 22 parks that Metro Vancouver manages for the public open in the township of Langley, that being Campbell Valley Park, Derby Reach Park, Glen Valley Regional Park, and Aldergrove Regional Park. Oh, and Bray Island Regional Park. Sorry, I always lump Derby and Bray together. Everything that we're going to be showing today with the different statistics, different habitats, comes from a study that was done in 2005. So things have changed. We have certainly lost a little bit of habitat, but for the most part, it's still fairly accurate. So, Garima, what is biodiversity?
Okay, hi everyone. So biodiversity is short for biological diversity, which means the diversity of living organisms. It refers to the variety of life across all levels of biological organization. The 3 important ones are genetic, species, and ecosystem. So genetic diversity is dependent on diversity of larger ecological systems or units, species, and ecosystems. So each species on Earth is some way related to every other species through genetic connections. And based on that, they are like grouped together, just like we see gray squirrels, chipmunks, marmots. They all kind of look similar because they share some type of genetics. The next is like the species diversity, which is like the variety of species within the same habitat or a region. And species are the basic unit of classification and a normal measure of biodiversity. Species are interdependent and they benefit each other a lot in several ways within an ecosystem, which I will tell you later about. So the next is our ecological diversity, which is the integrated network of different species present in any local ecosystem and the interaction between them. Ecosystem is an interaction between living and non-living components of the environment. These components are linked together through nutrient cycles and energy flow. So before I tell you some of the benefits of biodiversity, I would like to mention that BC is a large and diverse province, both physically and biologically, than any other province in Canada. So we have all different 9 soil orders that are found here in BC, which means that we have very rich vegetation, which kind of supports a large number of animal species here. And we also have endemic species here in BC, which means they are not found anywhere else in the world. And a good example is the Vancouver Island marmot. So we will keep our focus mostly on the biodiversity of Langley, and we'll look at different habitats through the Campbell Valley Regional Park, because this is a big park and it kind of has the greatest diversity of wild plants here in Langley, and almost like most plants that are found here in Langley are present in Campbell Valley Regional Park. So it is like a very good representation of biodiversity in Langley. So some of the benefits I would like to point out that we get from biodiversity are the various ecosystem services like food, fuel, shelter, clean air, water, and it stabilizes Earth's climate and helps in cycling of nutrients, energy flow, soil formation, detoxification and decomposition of waste. And then there are like the cultural services as recreational, aesthetic, and spiritual benefits that we get from biodiversity. So we are just going to move on to our first slide here about habitat. Lisa, would you like to play? Thank you. So habitat provides animals and plants with suitable food, water, shelter, and space. Each habitat supports plants and animals that are adapted to living under that particular environmental condition. And habitats are affected by both natural and human influences. Like when you see this habitat, you will see some of the human influences there. So the Campbell Valley Regional Park is a place to actually protect and preserve all these species for our future generations. And you will see some human influences in this place, which are now mostly part of that particular habitat for so many different animals. So there are, in this slide that this clipping that you just saw, you must have seen some, there was a marsh and then several habitats, especially like yeah, there you go again. So like different type of plants, shallow water plants and deep water plants and cattails, and it is surrounded by trees and it is supporting large number of birds. If you stand here at the viewing platform, you will actually get to see different butterfly species, and you'll get to hear flycatchers and marsh wrens and zero waxwings. So this is a very great combination of like different habitats within an ecosystem. So I would like to point out at this place that we saw lichens here. Now, lichens are really important for any given habitats. And as you go through Campbell Valley Regional Park, you will see that there are several species of lichens present here. They are bioindicators, they purify air for us, they absorb toxins, and some species are very sensitive to pollution. So if those species are present there, that means the place has really clean air. And their presence or absence indicates good air quality of that place. Their presence actually indicates good air quality. And lichens are a symbiotic relationship between algal and fungal component, or fungal and a cyanobacteria. So like the algal or the cyanobacteria, that component photosynthesizes and provides food, while the fungal component provides shelter and helps in chemical processes. They are also a main source of food for several species, and apart from that, they have numerous benefits. We will move on to the next slide, please. Now, this is our forest habitat. Now, forest dominates the vegetation, but there are also extensive areas of grasslands and wetlands here in Campbell Valley Park. Forest supports a number of species in them. Now, the deciduous forest is dominated by the presence of red alder and wine maple and big leaf maple trees. And it is the wine maple that actually can you hear me?
Yeah, just a couple of people have raised their hands. I'm not sure why. If I noticed that Claudia and Anne, and maybe if you if there's some issue, if you can type it in the chat box. I just wanted to note that I just said 2 people, so just to let them know that. Yeah, because I don't know what else to do with the raised hands. I can't really respond in Jersey. Sorry about that, but I'll just, if people...
I think it's just like saying hi or something.
I don't know, anyway. But I'll ask you to, and again, if you just, I'm just sorry to intervene, but just, if you hover your mouse cursor, if you're not sure how to do that, just across the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat box, and you click on that, and then you can type a message in there. So for Anne and Claudia, because I'm not sure how else to respond. Okay, sorry about that. Continue on. I just wanted to respond. Thanks.
Yeah, so, and then you can also see some coniferous trees as western red cedar in this part of the forest. The understory includes, I would like to name some of the shrubs here: salmonberry, red elderberry, thimbleberry, snowberry, Oregon grape, and then if you pass through here, you will notice that the big leaf maple trees are covered with a great variety of bryophytes and pteridophytes on them. So different type of ferns and bryophytes can be seen there. And you can't miss noticing the holes in the trees, which are very, very interesting to look at. These are made by like the woodpeckers, the Darwinian affiliated woodpeckers. They drill these holes, and certain small owl species use them as their home. So a very good example of coexistence of a species. And at this point, I would like to mention this term niche here, because like this is their role. This is what they are doing. So like the woodpeckers living in there, and the other species dwelling together, coexisting. And so niche is like as the animal relates to its environment through its niche. So a species niche reflects its use of resources and its functional role in the community. So this gives its habitat use, consumption of certain food, its role in energy flow and matter, and its interaction with other organisms. So we'll see that throughout different habitats, we will notice that how species are interacting with each other, and they are benefiting each other. They also prey on each other. So one species is kind of dependent on the other species. So all species have some role to play here. Moving on to our next type of habitat, which is like the mixed habitat. And here we'll see a lot of like conifers and cascara, cherry, Indian plums, willows, huckleberries, and rose hips, fragrant honeysuckles, and different type of like ground cover, like peppergrass, tiger lily, buttercups, starflowers. So this is another very rich habitat. And the coniferous forest is dominated by tall evergreen Douglas fir trees with evergreen undergrowth of salal and Oregon tree. And the part from where sunlight filters through the canopy, young trees and shrubs and ground cover actually flourish. And common ferns can be seen throughout the undergrowth. The next habitat here this is one of my favorite slides, and I really like this landscape here. These are the old fields, and so you can actually see the forest thinning to lower growing shrubs and meadow flowers appearing all over the field, which kind of make this place very scenic. So these type of areas and larger ecosystems kind of refers to as transitional zones, like where two ecosystems are meeting. That makes like a transitional zone that's called ecotone, and they have a richness of like diversity here. So they have really good diversity, these zones, because they can provide variety of habitats to certain species. Now, organisms vary in the range of their niches. So some species are with narrow range and have specific requirements. These are called specialists. They just live in a smaller, narrow area, and that is sufficient for its growth. While other species prefer these type of habitats because they have they live in a broader range, and they have more tolerances and are able to use a wide array of resources. So they like to move around in different habitats. So these type of zones are very good for these species, which are called generalists. So for example, like eagles, they like to live in different type of habitats and move in wider range. So our next habitat here that I'm going to talk about is wetlands. Now, wetlands are like buffer zones between water and land. So wetlands are the most biologically diverse of all ecosystems. They are flooded with water either permanently or seasonally. And they have the capacity to absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen with the help of all the characteristic vegetation that is present within them. They act as huge carbon sinks for atmospheric to absorb atmospheric carbon dioxide. They also prevent flood by acting as sponges to absorb excess water that washes from uplands and after rain. So the main type of wetlands are, and the one that we see here are like swamps, which are present in like forested wetlands. They are forested wetlands, and they are present in areas and are formed by accumulation of water, because most trees around don't require that water. So these swamps are formed there by just accumulation of water, and these are like soft areas, and they are not well drained. The next here is marsh. This is a freshwater marsh alongside the Little Campbell River, and you will see that the grasses here are short grasses, and this is like a large area covered by marsh alongside the Little Campbell River. The Little Campbell River, which Lisa will talk about more about the species, the endangered species that lives there. And the next is the McLean Pond. This has water throughout the year, and this marsh has like cattails and sedges, which are a food supply for species like muskrats. Okay, so they like you see in this marsh, you can see cattails and sedges, and they provide kind of like habitat for. They provide perches for birds like red-winged blackbirds and marsh wrens that actually like to perch on these cattails and sedges. They also support a wide variety of other species, and like frogs like to live in these marshes and use like the cattails and pond lilies to anchor their masses of eggs. So that is how these habitats support different species. Then there are several species of birds that are either like common dweller in these places or visitors in the marsh. Like one is the great blue heron, and one species that I haven't seen there, but Lisa pointed out to me, is the western painted turtle that also lives in this McLean Pond. So this is a very rich, like wetlands are the richest ecosystems of all other ecosystems.
What habitats do you think have the most, oh, it said diversity, and it's missing the last word there, but it most diversity. Oldfield, coniferous forest, mixed forest, or wetlands? Show you the results here. So everybody said wetlands.
Good, good.
That's correct? Okay.
Yeah, so they followed along, I'm glad.
Okay, we have some smart people here today.
Okay, I like, this is one other of my favorite slide here. This is the Oregon fairy shrimp, and this is only found here in BC. And we found this one in a local pond here in Langley while my coworker and I were sampling for bugs. And this one came, and we never saw it before while we were sampling. We never spotted this. So we were pretty excited to see this Oregon fairy shrimp. And they kind of go dormant when water disappears, but then they reappear. And they are not listed yet, but they are still rare species. So, yeah. We move on to the next one. This is about risk levels or status of species. Now, who is determining these different risk levels or status that we give to species? So there are like global authorities like the IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, or like the national that we have in Canada, the consulate, or like the provincial that we have, that actually determines the status for different species based on either national or provincial or local areas. So here are some of the terms I would just like to mention, and I'm not going to go into the details of species, but Lisa is going to jump in later and tell us all about the species that are at different levels here in Langley. So the first is special concern. That means we still have good number of them, but because it's not because of the species, but maybe because of the loss of habitat or other environmental factors, that there is a potential threat for them in future. So these are the species of special concern. Then there are threat ones. These threatened are like species that we are losing slowly, and they have a very good chance to become endangered or like just too left out in nature because of the loss of habitats or other environmental factors. And then endangered species are, which are very few out there in wild. So this is when we should be very much alarmed and try to protect them. Some endangered species here that we know of are like the northern spotted owl and the Salish sucker. And then there are extirpated, which means an entire population of that species has been lost from a particular area. So at some point, like the Salish sucker was thought to be extirpated from the Little Campbell River, but later it was found again. So that is that species. And then extinct, that means these species are no more left out in wild, so they don't exist anymore. And we have a very good picture that Lisa put here, a great example of species that are extinct. So these are some of the risk levels. And based on this, we should be taking care of our biodiversity. Now, recently, the Langley Bioblitz was organized, and Lisa was a part of it. She did a lot of work regarding that, and she was coordinating, and she's going to tell us more about the biodiversity of Langley and the results that they found in this Bioblitz. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Garima. We have lots of amazing species that are at risk and found in Campbell Valley Park. So we're just going to show you a few of them. One that's easily found just because they move so slowly. What is, of course, the Oregon forest snail. These guys are awfully adorable. They love the deciduous forests, the big leaf maples, especially where you find stinging nettles, because they love to munch on stinging nettles. Something I've tried myself. I myself can't recommend them, though others say they're delicious. The one creature that is no longer considered at risk, but was thought to be at risk for a while, was the Pacific sideband snail. These guys are fairly easy to spot because of their rosy bodies. They'll usually be found in broadleaf and mixed forest habitats. They love munching on fungus and other vegetation as well. Pretty beautiful snails. The Pacific sideband is our largest one. Oregon forest snail comes in a pretty close second. Some of our birds that we can find at risk out in Campbell Valley, we do have more species than just the ones I'm showing, of course, but these are just a few that are just absolutely adorable. Of course, our barn owls. Barn owls are actually found all over the world. They're found in India, Australia, Europe, and they're actually a very small area here in southwestern BC that they're found, but they are at risk or threatened is their status, mostly due to habitat loss. There is concern as well because of their diet. They do eat rodents, and there's concern about use of rodenticides. Then moving on to the owls when they find these lovely creatures to munch on at night. The owls would be one of the creatures that noted that spread across ecotones. These guys, of course, as their name would suggest, they like hanging out in buildings like barns, but they would also ordinarily nest in holes in old dead trees and forests, but they love to hunt over marshes and fields to find creatures to eat. Our barn swallows, they also like to nest in barns as well. Go pig. They're insectivorous, and their numbers have actually been dwindling, as I'm sure most of you know. Possibly concerns over the different habitats that they require. These guys have a huge migration from here in BC, where they breed, to all the way to Central America and Mexico. And so it's unsure if it's habitat loss or use of insecticides that are causing the loss to our barn swallows, but they are awfully cute. Anything we can do to protect them would be wonderful. Then we have our herps, our lovely amphibians and reptiles. The western toads are a special concern. Just to give you an idea of size, the little photo there on the top right for your screen is The yellow that's in that is the line on the middle of a road. These guys have mass migrations in July that usually makes them go across human treaded spaces such as roads, and they need to be able to get across these roads in order to get to the forests that they enjoy from the wetlands where they respond. Off the cute little creatures. There is concern this year due to COVID-19. There are quite a few programs out there to try and net these guys or fence them off, so there's one central place where they'll cross or be collected to be taken across roads. But due to COVID-19 and social distancing, there are some concerns that they won't be able to set up fences and do the usual thing that they do. The one here in Langley that Arosha runs has been canceled as far as I know. I'll just be counting. Northern red-legged frog. These guys are, you know, your typical frog. You flip them upside down with bright red legs, so pretty easy to figure out what they are. They need wetlands as well, and they live in various forest habitats after they hatch out and move away from their small wetlands. The western painted turtle. These guys are gorgeous. They're often confused for the red-eared slider that are introduced species out here, somewhat invasive. Red-eared sliders, you would see, of course, a red spot on their neck where you would think there might be a little ear for them. But the painted turtles are very hard to find. We don't have many. However, McLean Pond, one of the photos that Garima showed you, is where some western painted turtles have been released in Campbell Valley Park. And apparently I've been told they're doing quite well. These guys need open water year round, so the habitats that they like are very, very wet. Salish sucker. Garima did mention these guys before. These guys were thought to be extricated from the Campbell Valley, the Campbell River system, but they have been found. A group called the Arosha that's just over in the Surrey side of the Langley-Surrey border has found lots of these guys actually still live in the Campbell River, which is wonderful news. They require wetlands, but they need access to small streams with small gravels in order to spawn. Then we have dragonflies. These guys are great. I love these guys. Top one there is the blue dasher. The bottom one is the western pond hawk. These guys require wetlands for their life, and they eat lots of insects to help us out. So everyone that wants to make sure that we have bats out there to keep insects, we also need to make sure we have these lovable creatures as well. The western pond hawk, I would just like to note, they're large enough to eat small dragonflies. So they're a neat one to look out for as well. This is the Vancouver Island beggar tick. It's difficult to get a good photo of this one. We do have Vancouver Island beggar ticks here in Langley. They aren't only found on Vancouver Island, as the name might suggest. I actually don't know if we have any in Campbell Valley Park, but we have had some found very close to the park. So I would expect there's probably some there. These grow in wetland habitats, and they are actually endemic, as Garima pointed out earlier. The word endemic means they're only found in certain places. So they're endemic to southwestern BC and northwestern Washington. So it's the only places you can find them. So while they're of special concern, they are actually of global significance. Most of the information for the various species at risk that I just introduced you to, there's so many more, comes from the South Coast Conservation Program. This is a great group that you guys could get involved with, or definitely check out the amazing resources that they have put together on their website. There are some great ID cards to be able to find species at risk, to be able to go through and figure out if the snail that you have is just your run-of-the-mill garden snail or something more exciting than that. And they also have a fabulous free app that you can get for your smartphones to be able to go out and go looking for neat creatures. So one thing that we need to do in order to know what lands to protect is we need to know what's there. We need to know how at risk all of these things are. So usually the first thing when trying to evaluate and prioritize areas is to do an inventory. And collecting your data is great. Sharing it is even better. The Langley Field Naturalists is a group out here in Langley. They actually are working on inventorying different properties in the township of Langley. There's one property that they've actually found over 1,600 species, mostly by one volunteer in particular, Mr. Bob Poles, but a lot of other volunteers help him out, especially with the mosses. The photo here is Mr. Glenn Ryder. He passed away in 2013, but he actually collected a great deal of data, over 60 years of data in the township of Langley, and he was actually one of the people involved in protecting Campbell Valley Park 51 years ago when it was first saved and turned into a park. And his data has also helped protect some other areas here in Langley as well. There is a garden dedicated to Glenn over by the big red barn. That was in Jeff's photo in the beginning. And who knows, maybe data that you might collect today in 60 years could be something that helps us protect species at risk and habitats in the future. I have another question for you.
Do you already use tools to track species you see? So there's a notebook, calendar, and you can answer, you know, as many, click on as many as you want. So it's multiple choice. Notebook, calendar pages, eBird, iNaturalist, other, and show the results. So some of you are using iNaturalist, 27% using a notebook, nobody's using calendar pages. Just well, actually just one person is using eBird, and then a number of you said other.
Excellent. It's lovely to see that that lots of people are trying to record stuff that they see. Great. Now we just need everyone to share it. So some of our threats to biodiversity. You may have noticed a theme during this presentation regarding wetlands. A lot of the species that we've spoken about depend on wetlands, and there are all sorts of different kinds of wetlands. While they are the most diverse areas that we have in Langley, they are sometimes the least understood. A lot of them get filled in. People either want to farm the land or stick a really big house on it because it's nice and flat. So habitat loss is actually the biggest threat to biodiversity. When you lose the habitat, it's very, very difficult to remake it. Restoring a habitat is one thing, but actually making a wetland you don't really end up with the same thing that you lost. Fragmentation of the different habitats certainly hurts species, especially if you chopped a maple or a broadleaf maple forest in half and you put a great big wide space in between your Oregon forest snails. If they're munching over here on some stinging nettle, it's very difficult to get across an acre worth of grass or house if they want to get to the forest on the other side, unfortunately. Invasive species is a huge threat. This photo shows English ivy that's over on the way to McLean Pond on the north side of 16th Avenue. English ivy will take over an area very quickly, and it's very difficult for species to adapt as fast as invasive plants can take over an area. English ivy will actually kill a mature tree in about 10 years. So species being able to adapt in 10 years, I'm sure we can all understand is not fast enough. Pollution, of course, puts animals at risk in this climate change. Creatures that aren't able to adapt to our extra hot summers and extra cold winters that we've been having we end up losing them. So what can we do to help out species? We can certainly start in our very own backyard. Here are two images. The image in the background, not very diverse. It has grass. It has probably one type of shrub, flowering plant, looks like azalea perhaps, and 3 trees that actually all look to be the same type of tree as well. So not a lot of difference, not a lot of, certainly not a lot of diversity for species that could be coming into this garden. Whereas the photo in the foreground shows lots of different kinds of plants and flowers and spaces for wildlife to be able to use. The different flowers, if you use different plants, they'll have different bloom times. So if you have a flower one type of plant that blooms in the spring and another type of plant that blooms in the summer, you can understand that you would be able to feed creatures that depend on those flowers for a much longer period of time, especially our bees. So it's great to be able to feed them throughout the whole summer. They don't want to just eat. only when azaleas in bloom. If you can leave the leaves in the fall, these piles of leaves can be insulating places for little creatures to live, as well as bees. There are a lot of ground nesting bees, and but the leaves provide all sorts of great habitats for creatures that are trying to overwinter in your gardens. And if you have annuals that produce seed heads, if you can leave them around, those seeds could feed birds through the winter time instead of chopping them down and tossing them in greenways. They can stay up. They can actually look quite beautiful. There is a gentleman by the name of Piet Oudolf. He's a Dutch gardener that has found a lot of different types of perennials that can still look stunning even after they've died in the winter and provide habitats and food throughout the winter. But I would highly recommend the Grow Green Guide through that Metro Vancouver has done with UBC Botanical Gardens. They have some great ideas of different plants you could put in your garden that are very suitable to your garden as well. What else can we do? Invasive species, as I mentioned before, these are actually the second greatest threat after habitat loss to biodiversity. Invasive species can be found just about anywhere, even in our own gardens, like ivy, periwinkle, lamium, and controlling those in our own yard, making sure they don't spread out to other places is great. You can also volunteer to help out in the Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. They do have a meetup group. Unfortunately, I think with COVID, it might be on hold for now, but you can certainly go to the meetup group and sign up for when the meetups get going again, and go pull invasive plants in our lovely regional parks that are so stunning and host so much life. Providing water is actually a better way to attract birds and other wildlife to your garden than just bird seed. I find I get a lot of rats for the bird seed. Not really something I want, like getting into my car and chewing the wires in the engine. But providing water for birds, not so many rats is good. And the other things besides birds need the water, so it's great to be able to provide water in any way you can. Planting native plants is a wonderful way to help out species at risk and various other creatures in the area. Choosing native wildlife for your own, choosing native plants for your own backyard is great. You can also help plant them in other places as well. There's lots of different parks that host planting events. This is my buddy Grayson helping out planting some lupins, I believe he was helping out with, for a butterfly, not a butterfly, a pollinator paradise here in Langley City. You can also help reduce risks to wildlife. Picking up garbage, while it may seem small, you're helping wildlife and small amount of risks that we could prevent. Anything we can do is possible. Anything that we do to help prevent risks to wildlife is great, such as the toads when people go and collect them all in buckets and move them across a road. I'm always still amazed doing garbage cleanups that we can still find the 6-pack rings from cans. It's just, yeah, apparently there hasn't been enough images of wildlife being strangled by those things yet. So as Grima mentioned earlier, the Marsh groups had a Bioblitz, or virtual Bioblitz, in the first 2 weeks of June. It's over now, but we had a great time. There was 3,612 observations. One of the gentlemen that I noticed the name pop up made a lot of those observations. Thank you, Dave. And we had lots of different people involved in it. It was great. I don't think that there was 786 different species spotted. We still have to work our way through all the information, but it was a wonderful way to be able to get outside and track information. This is just the information that was put into iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is a great way to be able to share your data if you find wildlife somewhere, because it's open and public and everyone can access that information. These little guys, though, in this photo, they weren't seen during the Bioblitz. These are purple martins. They have actually just returned to Langley about three years ago now. The boxes were put up for them for 5 years before they finally found them again. But these guys, it's wonderful to be able to welcome species that we haven't seen in Langley for many, many years. again back to Langley. So these purple martin boxes are the end of Tavistock Point on Bray Island, but we couldn't go out to see them because Bray Island has been closed due to COVID-19. But hopefully we'll be able to go out and see them soon and flying around, feeding more young. We just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today, and we're happy to take any questions that you have.
These are the websites that you can go to for Pacific Parklands Foundation, Metro Vancouver, and for LEPS. So while we're answering questions, I'll just leave that up on the screen there. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Joe asked, what would be the best fish species for a pond in BC?
Oh dear.
You have any
It's best not to introduce any fish into ponds, simply because they can, if an area floods, even if the pond isn't directly connected to a creek, if that creek should flood due to a high rain event, then whatever fish you have in your pond could escape into the water system. So don't introduce any fish. Or wait for a flood and see what fish end up in your pond from the creek.
Okay, and Joe also had a question here. I'm trying to find it here. Where was it? Earlier. Oh, why can't we get rid of pine beetles? Aren't there predators that could be introduced to feed off of them?
Garima, did you want to try that one, or would you like me to answer it?
Garima, unmute yourself.
I think she said you.
Oh.
So, yeah, we don't have a lot of the mountain pine beetles here, but and yes, there are predators that feed on the mountain pine beetles, but it's making sure they have habitat for those predators to live in. Woodpeckers and various other insectivores like that will feed on them, but if we destroy the habitat that the woodpeckers would rather be living in, they can't. Population certainly can't keep up with the amount that we would need to control the invasive pine beetle.
And I have a question here. It's like, what acts or events are you doing to help your parks with climate change?
Jeff, do you want me to give a stab at that? Or?
Sure, why don't you?
Okay, so I don't work for Metro Vancouver, but I do go to all of the park committee meetings, and it is always an issue that arises whenever there is a plan for a park or the acquisition of land. And so part of it is anticipating climate change and how that affects our park plans. And the other part, of course, is how to mitigate climate change. Are there things that we can do? So as an example, Burns Bog, there was a fire, and we know that as invasive species come in after a fire, that has an effect on the bog. So there's a desire to find ways to, anticipate climate change and mitigate climate change. And there's a lot of more information out there from Metro Van if it's something that interests you.
Okay, are there any other questions?
There was a question of why is it called the Oregon fairy shrimp if it's only in BC?
Garima did answer that in the chat, but maybe you can.
Yeah, I did. I answered it again after you pointed out that my answer was only visible to the panelists. So yeah, it is distributed in Oregon, Washington, and then in BC along the coast. So we have some population. Recently, there was an article about it, and from, I think it was the Metro Vancouver Stewardship News, when they found some shrimps as well, and we found at the same time in a different pond. So yeah, they are here in BC.
So are there any other questions or comments? So first of all, thanks Lisa and Garima for a great presentation. And yeah, so you've got if you want more information about any organizations, Pacific Parklands Foundation, Metro Vancouver, or LEPS, the websites there. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And I hope you learned something, and yeah, and join us for our next webinar. Thanks again, and have a great day.
Thank you for Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.